All right, got another video, and an atheist is asked a supposedly unanswerable question for a Christian. So I'm going to take up the gauntlet and answer the question. And the question goes like this: does God choose to drown children? More specifically, he reads a passage in Genesis chapter 7, 21 through 24, where everyone drowns, and God's the one that does it. He drowns everybody. So, of course, the atheist says that God is a moral monster. Well, I'm going to give you a Christian's answer to that problem. They think it's unanswerable. Well, in the text, of course, my atheist friend here, he conveniently skips some pretty important details. Taking someone to court, not giving the full facts. Let's put it that way. If you're going to use the Bible, this is my rule though, if you're going to use the Bible to trash the Bible, then I get to use the Bible to defend the Bible, okay? But first I've got to give you a few what we call Christian concepts to see why we see it the way we do. Christians believe in the concept of the age of accountability. And here in Isaiah, it says he will eat curds and honey when he knows enough to refuse evil and choose good. For before the child will know enough to refuse evil and choose good, the land Canaan, whose two kings you dread, will be deserted, both Ephraim and Aram. Okay, so in the passage you can see that there's a point in a person's life where they're not physically, mentally, emotionally, or whatever capable of, quote, refusing the evil and choosing the good. Okay, so you have to reach the age of accountability. Now, before that time, you're not responsible for the wrong until you know enough to do the right. Now, to live as Christ, to die as gain is another passage, Philippians 1:21. So for a believer in Christ, death's nothing to fear. It's gain. Now, in John 11, it says this, and Jesus is talking. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes and adheres to, trusts in, and relies on me will live even if he dies. And everyone who lives and believes in me, a Savior, will never die. So Christians will never die. If you're a believer in Jesus today, you will never die. And what do you mean you'll never die? Well, you'll slough off this mortal coil, your physical body, I agree, and it will be, if you've ever watched the movie Ghost with Patrick Swayze, when he is shot, he runs after the perpetrator, but he doesn't know he's dead until he turns around, and he can see his body in the arms of a girlfriend. Now, I know, that's just a movie. I get it. Now, here is an example in real life from a person called Howard Storm. He's an atheist who experienced an NDE, and he'll give you the rundown of what happened to him. Okay. Hebrews 9:27, as it is appointed unto men once to die, but after this the judgment. We all die. We're all going to face physical death, every one of us. Okay, so now let's go back. So those are the things I want you to keep in mind, those little concepts. So now back to the kids. So, of course, the atheist thinks that this is a hard question for a Christian because of the kids, right? They call God a moral monster for stopping not only all the evil, but the kids. They seem to pay a heavy price, right? Okay, so the atheist cry is, well, the kids, they did nothing wrong, they're innocent. So God's a moral monster for killing the kids along with the adults, right? But here's my claim. As it turns out, as it's going to turn out, and you will see, the kids are the fortunate ones in this situation. Now, of course, I'm talking from a Christian perspective, right? So you say what? I say, yeah, watch. In our situation here, the kids have not reached the age of accountability, so they're not responsible. So if they experience physical death, as in the flood passage, they go to heaven. In fact, think of the kids we talk about, and we should, filling up cancer hospitals all over the world. And like right now in America, they're actually being sex trafficked, across the border and murdered and everything else at our southern border every day in America. Innocent kids, whether we like it or not, die every day in this country and around the world. But in this situation, we're talking about the flood now. When God plays God, supposedly, to the atheist, he's a moral monster. Well, we'll see. Now, there's a movie out there called Heaven is for Real. And it's supposed to be true. It's supposed to be a true story. I believe it. you'd have to make up your own mind. But in the movie, a young boy, like 3 to 4 years old of age, he dies on the operating table. His appendix burst, if I remember correctly. Well, he goes to heaven. And he's told that, no, you're going to have to come back to earth. And he doesn't want to come back. Think of a kid. Where does a little kid, 3 to 4 years old, where does he want to be? Probably with mom more than anything else, right? Well, if you ask the kids here in the Genesis passage, okay, if you could ask the kids which they prefer, this life or the next, well, they'd all choose heaven. Well, why? Why would they all choose heaven? Well, it's because of the adults in the room. Here's the passage that was conveniently left out from the atheist. Of course, it's going to be left out, but here's the passage. The Lord saw that the wickedness, depravity of man was great on the earth, and that every imagination or intent of the thoughts of his heart were only evil continually. The Lord regretted that he had made mankind on the earth. Hey, look at there. God almost wiped us all out. And he was deeply grieved in his heart. So the Lord said, I will destroy, annihilate mankind, whom I've created from the surface of the earth. Not only man, but the animals and the crawling things and the birds of the air, because it deeply grieves me to see mankind sin. And I regret that I've made them. The population of the earth was corrupt, absolutely depraved, spiritually and morally putrid in the God's sight, and the land was filled with violence, desecration, infringement, outrage, assault, and lust for power. God looked on the earth and saw how debased and degenerate it was, for all humanity had corrupted their way on the earth and lost their true direction. God said to Noah, I intend to make an end of all that lives, for through men, the land is filled with violence, and behold, I am about to destroy them together with the land. Now, the adults in the room, what was it? Every inclination of their heart was evil all the time. Now just imagine what kind of life these kids were living on the earth at that time. Like maybe rape, murder, sex trafficking, physical abuse, mental abuse. I mean, the adults in the room, every inclination of their heart was evil all the time. Now, I agree. Their physical death would have been terrible. The drowning it would have been terrible. But what do they gain from it? Well, they gain heaven. The kids do, and they never lose their salvation. They gain heaven, and they live there eternally. Oh, by the way, if God wipes out the continually evil adults, and say God does spare the kids, who would take care of the innocent kids on earth? It's not a dumb question. In heaven, all their needs are supremely met. But on earth, if God just wiped out all the adults, what would happen to the kids anyway? Well, they would struggle to survive, if at all. So actually, it turns out, in both situations, it was God's grace in the flood situation. It means heaven for the kids, and no subsequent, at least hardship and starvation, possible starvation and death that way. Now, I'm not done. Okay, that was a Christian perspective. Now let's look at it from an atheist perspective. How about that? Let's see from an atheist perspective what it would have been like. So it turns out actually that the question is really strange from an atheistic perspective. Why? Well, let's see. From the High Priest of Atheism, Richard Dawkins, quote, the universe we observe has precisely the properties we should expect if there is at bottom no design, no purpose, no evil, no good, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. And that's just too bad. However, if the atheist, and because you're made in the image of God, and you are, if you maintain your moral stance now, that God is evil because he chooses to drown children in the flood, then atheism is a false religion. It's a false doctrine. It's a false way of looking at the world. Why? Because you've just proven that moral values and duties do exist. If there is objective evil, then a standard of objective moral values and duties exist apart from us, and they come from a higher source than we do. So, Mr. Atheist, which is it? Is your high priest Richard Dawkins correct? There is no evil, no good, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. In other words, evil, even evil, is subjective in your mind. So the question is meaningless from an atheist perspective. So, do they exist? Moral objective values? Objective moral values, do they exist? Well, if they don't, what God does is subjective. And in this case, it would only be evil in the eye of the beholder. So, as a theist, do I believe that evil exists? You bet I do, and I'll prove it. Torturing babies for fun is objectively evil, and everybody knows it. Everybody knows it. But from an atheist perspective, if Richard Dawkins is correct, and at least I give Richard Dawkins kudos, I always do, because at least he's honest. He's honest with his worldview. The atheist has no grounds to complain. Not one ounce of ground to complain. So the conundrum is the atheist who asked the question was actually proving that he understands. The atheist who asked the question was actually proving that he himself believes in objective moral values and duties. So if they do exist, then guess what? You're trying to trash God, but you just prove that God actually exists by your question. Bottom line is, atheism offers us both worm food in the end. No matter what happened to those kids, it doesn't matter. There's no justice, there's no love, there's no hope. It's just blind, pitiless indifference, and that's just too bad. No evil, no good. Talk about a dark side, and that's what prompted this whole thing. In fact, only God can take the flood. He could take the flood and turn it around into an actual blessing for those kids. That little boy at 3 to 4 years old that died on the operating table of appendicitis did not want to come back to this world at all, because he was in eternity and in a place that's much better than this place. And guess what? If you believe in Jesus, you will go there too, no matter how old you are. It's never too late as long as you're listening to this message. Have a blessed day. Bye.